المجال لمحمد غالب الياسري لبدء اللقاء مع الشاب بلال حمود المرشح عن عضوية مجلس ولاية ميشيغان الأمريكية.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. As the Michigan primary election edges closer, it is imperative that our community members make their voices heard. Joining us today is Bilal Hammoud, a candidate for State Representative representing the 15th District. Hammoud's district includes West Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. He describes himself as a lifelong resident of Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. He has dedicated himself to a life of public service. From grassroots activism to the executive office of the Michigan Department of State, he has learned that when we work collectively, we can instill real change. He believes that we need a leader in Lansing with experience at every level of government who can bring resources back home, especially in the face of a failing infrastructure, disruptions to our students' learning, threats to our public health, and challenges facing small businesses. Bilal, we are glad to have you join our radio broadcast this evening. Please provide us some background information on your career in public service and community engagement.
Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be able to share some of my background with you all and really get to talk about the importance of getting out and making your voice heard during the election this year, during August 2nd. I guess I could start by talking about where my education comes from. I got to attend Dearborn Public Schools and then pursued my degrees in public health and neuropsychology at Wayne State University. And it's at that point where I discovered my love for research. I was doing research, neuroscience, studying Parkinson's, and I fell in love with it. But to go from researching the brain to practical trials, it was going to take 15 to 20 years. But I wanted something more direct. I started going to more the nonprofit sector. I started serving the organization Forgotten Harvest, where we help people out with food distribution, making sure that those who didn't have access to just the basic need of food, we'd be able to get that stuff. Same thing on the front of housing. Those who didn't have housing access, we worked to make sure that they could. And there was nothing more rewarding than getting to help people out who are in that phase of trying to get back on their feet. Because you get to see them with the most genuine intent trying to help their families. From there, I found myself working in the city of Sheboygan, Michigan, a very small town in northern Michigan, where I was able to help bring in over $500,000 of grants to help out the small businesses in the downtown area and help revitalize the city. I was brought on by our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benjamin, to work as our the first Arab American in the executive office, leading the public engagement team around ID access and voter access. And alhamdulillah, that was an amazing opportunity for me because that was statewide. I was able to promote language access. So the reason why we were able to get voter registration forms, absentee ballot applications, all these different documentation in 9 different languages across the state is because we had a leader like Jocelyn Benjamin who was making this happen, who let us make this happen. And so she started a task force, the Language Access Task Force, and appointed me the chair to make sure that we were getting those things done. And after that, we saw the most successful election in 2020. We were able to work to make sure all of our documents are translated into those 9 different languages: Arabic, Spanish, Bengali, Burmese, Tagalog, Korean, and more. And now we're getting to see that shift towards language access with our ballot. Dearborn, people are going to be able to vote in Arabic for the first time ever in
Very well said. Very well said. Bilal, one of the fundamental issues facing our region is infrastructure. Your website mentions that in 2021, our district saw unprecedented amounts of flooding, destroying the homes and livelihoods of too many residents. Poor infrastructure, such as aging lead pipes, have inflicted unbearable costs on our residents. This deterioration of our infrastructure has a real and damaging impact on schools and businesses, and it must be reversed. Since the floods last year, Michigan is expected to receive up to $10 billion from the recently passed Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. The bill allocates $1.3 billion to repair water infrastructure, such as lead pipes. The state also has announced plans to spend $300 million as part of the Michigan Clean Water Plan, which would help repair our water infrastructure. Bilal, what is your plan to help prevent and mitigate floods? And in addition, what improvements will we see to our infrastructure?
So in infrastructure in general, it's making sure that funding is being allocated to those long overdue investments. So when we talk about our schools, a lot of these buildings are old and they require constant maintenance and upkeep. Part of that is making sure that we're modernizing them as time progresses. So upgrading the infrastructure of our schools so they're not falling apart, so that we have air conditioning in these classrooms so the kids are struggling. There's a lot that needs to be done there. Additionally, making sure that we're holding all levels of government accountable. You talk to the city, you talk to the county, you talk to the state, they should all be on the same page as to what's happening, flood mitigation, and that investment that needs to occur for that infrastructure so that it's not occurring in the future. There needs to be a task force at all levels of government and connect them together so that we're seeing that proper investment. We're seeing that team put behind that organization so that we know that the issue is being resolved. Because right now, I don't see the changes that need to occur in order to prevent this from occurring year after year. And the floods are just an example of infrastructure gaps everywhere. We talk about our piping. There's still lead in a lot of our water. When we talk about having clean water that we feel comfortable and confident drinking, it doesn't exist. So people think that the big lead issue only occurred in Flint during the crisis. No, it's still occurring all over Michigan. And so we have to make sure that we're doing more frequent testing, more regular testing. It's a big part of infrastructure not only of physical aspects of your community, but also the mental well-being, the well-being of your students through education. It's all connected. So when we're talking about public health, mental health, making sure that the environments we're living in are comfortable and accessible, we need to be making these investments and bringing in funding that exists. Right? It's not adding an extra burden on families right now through an extra tax. It's funding that exists in our state budget, in our federal budget, through grants, and through these publicly sourced dollars. Bring them back to these communities, these neighborhoods, and make sure that it's not an extra burden on residents. And that's how we can bring that funding in to make sure that we're addressing that infrastructure gap. Again, it's long overdue. And so if we're going to see that change, it also means we're putting in dollars to our amenities. Our cities are only as good at times as their history and our amenities. And if we're talking about the amenities like our parks and our playscapes and our libraries, these need to be invested in wholeheartedly. So these playscapes that I've seen are falling apart. They've got splinters, they've got rust. I wouldn't feel comfortable playing in it, let alone letting my kids play in it, or my cousins, or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we have safe spaces for our playscapes and our playgrounds that are updated. So it's all part of that infrastructure update that it needs to occur.
Yes, very well said. As climate change continues to be a persistent problem, how will you bring clean and energy efficient infrastructure to our cities?
Well, it's about making sure that we incentivize clean energy, right? And if we look at some of our local energy companies, back in 2018, we saw a push for an IRP, integrated resource plan, which would basically make it so that for the next 20, 30 years, the energy companies didn't have to worry about renewable resources, didn't have to worry about non-carbonation. They just had to worry about their profits. And for a company that's legally monopolized, that shouldn't be allowed. also the infrastructure of electric vehicles, right? If we're talking about wanting to make this green wave and have people drive more electric, we need to make it so that unions can produce these vehicles. We need to make it so that they're safe and reliable. We need to make sure that it's something that there's an infrastructure for. And if any state is going to be on the leading edge of green electric vehicles, it should be Michigan. Every gas station should be offered right now. I'm surprised it's not. Every gas station should be offered a tax incentive. You put up a charging station at your gas station, you get X amount of dollars. And those dollars will help them not only make money in the future, but help transition into that more energy efficient transportation. Of course, that also goes into the idea of transit. We need to have a transit system that actually works so that we can mass transit people, not only so that they have more accessible options for getting to work, but also so that we can save on energy costs when it comes to getting people from X to Y to Z. So we're talking about just the basic infrastructure that our state should be having. That energy comes with it, making sure that we're saving energy costs where we can. And then, of course, addressing the issue of pollution. We're not. Right now, we're headed towards a direction where climate change is going to become irreversible. We're seeing it day to day. We know how hot it is. It's not normally this hot this time of year. Our classrooms and our students suffer because of it. We're seeing that impact of climate change, and we're not doing anything about it. Holding the entities that are polluting more accountable and putting caps on the amount of total pollution that we are allowing within a region. So not just saying, hey, you're a company that produces stuff here, and then next door to you is a company that produces stuff here. Both of you guys are capped at 10. No, it should be in total that area is capped at 15, so that the surrounding area also isn't facing the detrimental impacts of that pollution. So it all goes hand in hand with that public health aspect, the infrastructure aspect. But that's really how we need to tackle climate change. And some of that happens at the state level as a state representative, and some of that happens at the federal level. But it's making sure all those levels of government are working together. That's how we get it done.
Very well said, Bilal. You mentioned that industry and holding them accountable to pollution. Southeast Michigan in general is a stronghold of the automotive industry. How will you, as a state representative, hold companies accountable in terms of their carbon emissions and their pollution?
Well, depends. We're talking about entities that are producing vehicles and these well, I guess it depends. So we're talking about corporations that are polluting. The prime example is, I think now it's called Business Flip, formerly AK Steel. We've seen them kind of go through these multiple changes, different owners, and through those various cycles, some have been worse polluted than others, but consistently it impacts the local community. So your question is, how do we hold these entities accountable? It's making sure that they're being responsible in the way that they're producing their goods. It's not about limiting the industries, but it's about making sure that there is the abuse. And that's where that line gets drawn. The abuse of industry and the abuse of local residents should not take precedent over profits. And with profits being at record highs, and the workers honestly not seeing a lot of that, why should we be compromising on our well-being for the profits of a very select few? If the money from the entity goes back into its working class, goes back into its union employers, to its labor, that's one basic infrastructure that our state should find to compromise. But when it doesn't even do that, then we have to address the initial problem. We keep trying to put band-aids on these broken bones without addressing the broken bone.
Excellent. Another critical issue that you promised to tackle is education. Your website claims that COVID-19 has caused an intense disruption to the academic lives of our students, ranging from poor test performance, mental and physical health strains, to irreplaceable extracurricular experiences. This learning gap must be addressed with strong, coordinated coordinated leadership from all levels of government. The American Rescue Plan Act and other COVID relief funding has currently endowed Michigan with $3.7 billion for education. The total federal spending per student in our district ranges from just a little bit less than $3,000 to almost $14,000 per student. Over the next 3 years, Michigan will continue to make investments in our education, all totaling up to approximately $6 billion. Bilal, as a state representative, what will you do to ensure that our schools receive the funding they need to improve on their infrastructure?
I've touched on this in a lot of ways. It won't linger too long, but it's bringing in those dollars that already exist at the state, federal level, and making sure they're getting to our school district, and then making sure that these grants are applicable to the issues, right? Not just writing a blank check to the school. It's use a check for air conditioning in this school. That's how it can be appropriated. Other dollars can be used, and we can make sure it's actually getting done. But it's again, like we mentioned on our website, it has to have a coordinated effort from all levels of government. If we start siloing ourselves, as we tend to do in government, nothing is going to change. So it's a matter of sourcing those resources that do exist and just bringing that back to Michigan. I think a lot of people don't recognize that Michigan, on a 1 to 50 scale compared to other states, is the worst. It's 50 out of 50 in terms of government transparency and government accessibility. That's not a good number to be proud of. That's an indicator of why things have kind of fallen to the wayside for so long. So we have to be addressing that at its core, because that's going to open up a lot of potential for our state.
Excellent. And what will you do as a state representative to make education, public education, of higher quality and more accessible?
That's a really good question. Public education systems are the building blocks of any community. So we talk about our teachers. Right now, they're being put in 40-person classrooms with no teachers rating. In temperatures like this, how are they expected to be able to have a comfortable learning environment or create that learning environment? They're not given much opportunity to grow, not given the opportunity to be able to find greater education so that they can invest that back in the students. So if we want to start improving the public school system, we have to invest in its talent. And that means the educators and the students. Personally, I think that if you're going to be a teacher, if you're going out of your way to get a degree and then a master's degree, to be able to teach students of already very selfless career choice, you shouldn't be paying, $100,000 worth of debt for your master's degree in teaching. So if you're teaching in a public school system, you should have that license. Making that access to higher education more accessible is how we get better talent in our schools. And we talk about the students themselves. Reducing the classroom sizes, making sure the curriculum isn't intensely focused on testing, but reducing the impact of the non-stop standardized testing, and actually giving some flexibility to teachers in their curriculum so they can have more creative approaches to learning. That's how we're going to be able to be effective as a legislator to help improve our education systems and our public school systems.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bilal, for your time. Finally, we urge all eligible voters to go out and vote for Bilal Hammoud on August 2nd or before that at your local clerk's office. If you're not already registered to vote, you can do so at your local clerk's office. And we thank you, Bilal, for your time, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Good rest of your night.
Thank you. You too.
ثانك يو بلال، شكرا عمو، الله يحفظك. نحث جاليتنا الكريمة الخروج للتصويت. بإمكانهم طبعا الذهاب يوم غد الخميس والجمعة والاثنين إلى مقر البلدية، بإمكانهم الانتخاب هناك في البلدية، الانتخابات المبكرة. أيضا الانتخابات يوم 2/8 الثلاثاء القادم راح تكون في المراكز الانتخابية المعروفة لدى أبناء الجاليات الكريمة. دعوة لانتخاب الشاب الكفؤ والجدير بلال حمود يوم الثلاثاء أو في الانتخابات المبكرة يوم 2/8 الثلاثاء المقبل بإذن الله، والتصويت له عن الدائرة ال15 لعضوية مجلس نواب ولاية ميشيغان. شكرا بلال، الله يحفظك ويرعاك، وتمنياتنا لك بالنجاح والتوفيق.